This is the second part of an introduction to horoscope interpretation, the first steps in becoming an astrologer. And before I went through the fundamentals, and now I want to go into three things today: houses, aspects, and transits. So the basic circle of the zodiac is divided into 12 to get the signs. And this, when a planet acts through a sign, it changes the quality of the planet. So Venus would be different in Aries compared to Taurus. It would act differently. It'd be the same fundamental principle, but it would come across very differently. Now there's another division of 12, which are the houses. And this is where in your life you would expect to see that energy operating. And the 12 houses are divided in a particular way. There's one system called the equal house system, which just divides a circle into equal bits of 30. I think we can ignore that entirely. The other house systems that are available, the two popular ones being Placidus and Koch, it's very complex to describe why the house systems are different from one another, so I won't go into that. But Placidus and Koch, they both work for me. And sometimes if you do a chart and you see that you prefer one to the other, that might well tell you which house system you prefer to use. So there are different house systems. They divide the circle into different batches, different sizes of houses. That's a more complex thing for later. If a planet is acting in the first house, then the first house tells you the area of your life in which that planet is most clearly to be seen. And we're going to go through the 12 expressions of the houses now. The first house is mainly about the self. Who am I and how am I presenting myself to the world? It unfolds from the Ascendant. So we've discussed the Ascendant being the persona, the coloured glass, or as it were, through which you see the world. And the first house is just expressing that general idea more fully. So any planets in the first house are to do with your persona. And so if you look at the first planet around from the Ascendant, this is called the rising planet. That says quite a lot about how you appear to the world. If it's Saturn, you're going to appear stern and wise, perhaps. And if it's Venus, you would appear beautiful and playful, perhaps. So the first planet after the Ascendant, and we go around from the Ascendant. The Ascendant is the bit on the left, on the horizon of the chart. So the first house is the first below that horizon, and then it goes round further. So the first house is about personality and expression of self. The second house is about what you own, so possessions and values also. What you own also is a phrase that can be used to express what you value. It's often associated with wealth and money, but it also relates to the things that you find important. The third house is to do with your mind and how to develop a certain mentation, a certain way of thinking. So it has quite a lot to do with school, has a lot to do with talking to your extended neighborhood and family, the people that you sort of form your local neighborhood community with, just picking up the general ideas that everybody shares locally. It has to do with how you think, whether you've got a disciplined mind. If you've got Mercury in the third house, then you're probably quite a sharp thinker, quite a fluent thinker, or you might be good at languages or something like that. Fourth house is a lot to do with our emotional stability, emotional security, and it's the place where we call home. That unfolds from the nadir, the IC, which is the position of rootedness. So where we root ourselves, our home life, that's the 4th house. If you've got planets there, they would express most clearly at home. If you've got Mars in the 4th house, for example, then you might find confrontations occurring in your home life. You might have a challenging relationship with your father as a child, or you might be more willing to do physical work if you own where you are, which makes it your home, you know. 5th house is to do with creativity, and therefore play, and therefore children. And it also would include casual love affairs, that kind of play, anything which you're doing for fun, really. That's the 5th house. 6th house is more to do with work, and going to work and getting paid for it, service, duty. It's quite a lot to do also with taking care of your physical health, your physical well-being, and remedies, healing remedies, that kind of thing. It's a Virgo principle. Each of these houses relates to a certain sign. So the first relates to Aries, second to Taurus, third to Gemini, and so on. The 6th house is a Virgo house. The 7th, a Libra house, relates to relationship, particularly one-to-one. So the 7th house comes from the descendant, which is where we form our one-to-one partnership. And the 7th house is all about how you get along with your other half, as it were. Planets, if you've got lots of planets in the 7th house, then you really do want to be in relationship. If you've got Pluto in the 7th house, then you might find it's rather difficult to form casual relationships. You might find that the only type of relationship you can fulfill is one which is a real encounter with the depth of your being, both sides of the equation. So that would be an intense experience. It might be binding, really binding for life. It's a bit difficult to say whether it would bring you closer together or separate you forever, but it's going to deal with the truth. You're going to find the truth of who you are if you have Pluto in the 7th. If you've got Jupiter in the 7th, you might have lots of one-to-one relationships. Venus in the 7th, lovely. You're going to really enjoy your Venus there. Perfect for the task of forming relationship. 8th house is to do with commitment. So things where we step beyond the casual into the involved. That's the 8th house. So it's a lot to do with sex, and that obviously unfolds from one-to-one relationship. It also has to do with legacy, inheritance, money that you receive when somebody's died, because the 8th house is resonant with Scorpio, and so death and birth and sex and taboo. 8th house is also about what you do which the society says you shouldn't do. When you bind together with another person, that's 8th house. Contract. 9th house is about knowledge. And this comes out of the 8th, doesn't it? The knowledge that you get from involvement and commitment is of a higher order. And 9th house relates to Sagittarius. So that's higher order knowledge, experiencing culture shock, travel, studying the mysteries, studying further education, university. All of these things when you expand consciousness. That's the underlying principle of the 9th. Now the 10th unfolds from the midheaven, so it's a lot to do with your branching out into the world. Therefore it's associated a lot with career. And also social involvement. You get a reputation by being socially involved. You're involved with a society, a community, and they think of you as James the so-and-so. So my reputation might be that I'm an astrologer, for example. And the planet in the 10th house would be expressed generally in your career or in your reputational mode of being. The sign that leads the 10th house shapes the 10th house. The same for all of the houses. The cusp, the beginning of that house tells you a lot about the qualities of the house. So my 10th house begins with Scorpio. I'm going to be quite Scorpio-like in the public eye. I'm going to be seen as, well, somebody who tries to engineer transformations, perhaps, somebody who is a little bit hidden, perhaps. The 11th house unfolds from that when we've actually developed a social role. We find ourselves in the company of people with whom we share our hopes and our fears. And so the 11th house is all about forming groups. If you've got a lot of planets there, then you're going to be wanting to be a part of the groups that are being formed. If you've got Sun in the 11th, you might be the leader of a group. Saturn in the 11th, you might be a bit reluctant to get involved with groups, but when you do get involved, then you'd be an authority figure, or somebody who takes responsibility for keeping the group together. 12th house is about solitude. It's where we lock ourselves away from society. If we don't do it ourselves on retreat, we might be locked up in a hospital or a mental institution or something. So the 12th house is where we spend time with our own thoughts. And if you've got planets there, then you might not mind that. If you've got Sun in the 12th, you might be quite a reclusive person. Or Venus in the 12th, you might really love your own company and enjoy creativity when you're alone. So the 12th house is all about solitude. So when I'm looking at a chart, I don't really look at the houses first. I look at that actually as a second thing. I prefer to study the planets in the signs and the planets with their aspects primarily, and only looking at the houses as a secondary indicator. That's partly because the house system is not known. We don't really know what house a planet is in, not really. It's not well defined. Secondly, because energies themselves are what interest me. Personality, psychology, the absolute energy of a person. And they can take it into whatever realm of life they want, but they're still the same person, and that interests me more. So houses are of secondary concern to me. Excluding, however, the angles, the first and the fourth, and the 7th and the 10th houses begin with these angles, the ascendant, nadir, descendant, and midheaven. And these particular points, and therefore the houses that they control, that's of special importance. And if you have any planets conjuncting these 4 points within about 5 degrees, then they're very strongly emphasized. These angular planets are primary energies in your life. Now I want to talk about aspects. You'll see lines in a horoscope that join 2 planets together, and that suggests that they're in aspect. Different aspects exist according to the degrees of separation between them. If 2 planets are in the same position, they're in conjunction. If they're in the opposite sign, so Libra is opposite Aries, Scorpio is opposite Taurus, and more or less at the same degree, then they're in opposition. If they're square, so Aries is square to Cancer, Taurus is square to Leo, 90 degrees, then that is a different kind of energy. That square energy is different from the conjunction. The semi-square, half of that, less important, but still an aspect. So you've got the conjunction, opposition, square, semi-square. The conjunction is probably helpful. The other 3 are more frictional. Helpful, yes, but through the operation of conflict, sometimes overcoming difficulty, experiencing friction. The soft aspects are the trine, 120 degrees. So these are the same elements. Typically, a water sign would be trine to another water sign. If your sun is in Pisces and your Saturn is in Scorpio, more or less the same degree, they would be in trine. The sextile is half of that, 60-degree aspect. And so Aries would be sextile Gemini at the same degree, Taurus would be sextile to Cancer at the same degree, and that would have a certain type of quality to it. I want to talk about these qualities of aspects. Conjunction, when 2 planets are in conjunction, you don't really know which is doing what. They're so interacting together that they can't act alone. So they act as though they were one thing. I've got a conjunction Mars and Taurus together, Mars and the Sun in Taurus together, and I don't know what it's like to be other than assertive when I'm being myself. That's what I'm like because I'm Mars-like. And I can't really tell you what Mars is like alone because I don't know. I can work it out with my head, but I don't feel it because my Sun and Mars are in conjunction. I can't feel them separately, not really. Oppositions give you a sense of the same intensity of involvement between the two planets, but much more obviously so. And typically, if you've got an opposition, you'll attract a person who mirrors your energy, so that you can see there's my position and their position, and you have to work out what you're going to do with that. You can be the seesaw, their turn, my turn, their turn, my turn, or the tug of war. I'm not having it, he's not having it, we tug and so on. So there's two ways of dealing with the opposition. The opposition brings a huge amount of awareness to a situation. You can't ignore an opposition, it's in your face. A square is a bit like that. You can't ignore it. A square is frictional. And there's nothing wrong with friction if you're trying to get a job done. If you're trying to relax, friction's a bit of a nuisance. But if you're trying to get a job done, you need friction, or you won't do anything. You try walking uphill on an icy slope. You can't do it. You need friction to walk up a hill. You need friction to overcome challenges in life, or you won't bother. And by overcoming challenges, you achieve things. So to achieve things, you want the what's called the hard aspects. They're the red ones in the charts typically. So these opposition squares and semi-squares, they're the hard aspects. They give you friction, and you want that in order to do something. It's not always enjoyable, and you really need to step up to the mark to deal with these hard aspects, but then you achieve things. The soft aspects, the trine is the softer of the two. Energy just flows easily in a trine, so it's really lovely for relaxing. And if you have a trine in your chart, then those two planets are naturally supportive to each other, always friendly, always helpful to each other, metaphorically speaking. Lovely, the trine. If you've got three planets all in trine to each other, then that's called a grand trine. And the energy just moves around and around and around, and it's a lovely feeling. But unless you've got one of those planets opposing something else to create a kite, then you can't really do much with the energy. I knew a woman who had, I think, 5 planets involved in a grand trine in Earth. And so she just had all of this abundance, physical things come to her. Really big house, lots of money. She never did any work. She was quite a big woman. She used to enjoy all physical things, including food. And she had all that come to her, but she could never actually do anything. She couldn't decide what to happen, because the earth energy just flowed and flowed and flowed around her, and she couldn't stop it to focus it. But if you actually put opposition into that configuration, then the opposite is true. You can channel that energy into a particular focus, which is the opposition planet. That's a bit more advanced, that level of aspect. But now the sextile, this is my favorite aspect of all. I've got a Mercury sextile Venus. Now with a sextile, it's like almost like the opposition of a trine. So you get the benefits of all of the energies of the trine, plus this opposition that I spoke of, that you would have in the kite. And that means that you can choose to use the sextile or not. And if you choose to use it, you have to bring a certain level of consciousness to it, but then you have a real readiness of expression. So that in my case, Mercury, Venus, I've got this communication thing with Mercury, Venus, beauty and harmony. If I really put my mind to it and I think carefully about how I'm going to present my communications. I can try and be a bit poetic or something. I mean, I'm really trying to get beauty across with that, and sometimes I like doing that, and I like to sing. I like to present beauty with my communications in that sort of musical way. So that's an aspect of the sextile. But if I don't, then I can actually be quite forgetful of the Venus when I'm communicating. And so I just communicate my Mercury in Aries really sharply without trying to make it beautiful. Or I can be enjoying the feelings of relating to somebody without actually thinking of anything to say. You know, I don't involve the Mercury. So each planet can operate separately if I choose that to be the case, or in better terms, if I don't choose to operate the sextile. So sextiles seem to give you a lot of choice, and choice is good. So these aspects not only apply within your own horoscope, but they apply if you compare your horoscope to your partner's. So if your partner has a moon where your sun is, that's a conjunction between my sun and your moon, that's lovely. But if they have a square and their sun is square your sun, that's eventful but not always lovely. And if they have other planets like Pluto square your Venus, that would be unavoidable and intense and sometimes very exciting indeed, but very troubled. And if it was Mars, Pluto square Mars, like my Mars square your Pluto, that would very definitely lead to conflicts of a quite startling nature at times. I think that would be troublesome, but exciting and potentially capable of really having success in doing big things. We could create big projects with that. So the way in which you and your partner interact is indicated by the mutual aspects between you. And this whole study of synastry, it's called, is a big subject in astrology. You can check out, if you want to, how you are with your partner. I've put a connection in the relationships part of my website, so that you can do a calculation and see how you connect with your partner on that level. Now, to talk about transits, what that means is that you compare where the planets are today with where they were when you were born. That's what a transit is. So perhaps now Pluto's at 23 degrees Capricorn, and if you were born more or less at this time and you've got your sun at 24 Capricorn in your chart, then you're going through a Pluto conjunct Sun transit. Or you might be going through a Pluto square Moon transit or something like that. And you could have a Neptune square Ascendant and a Uranus conjunct Mercury transit. So we look at the position of the moving planets in relationship, in other words, in aspect to your natal planets. And it's a big deal, these transits, some of them. The slower moving planets, by which I mean Pluto, Neptune and Uranus, also Chiron, and to some lesser extent Saturn and Jupiter. These planets are the ones that really make a difference that we need to study. So the other ones come and go very quickly. They're more to do with moods and brief opportunities, so we won't bother too much with those. The first transit that people are perhaps made aware of is called the Saturn Return. Basically, that's a transit of Saturn to your natal Saturn by conjunction. So it returns. It takes 29 years to go around the full circle, and it's in the same position and forms a conjunction by transit to your natal Saturn. And then you have Saturn opposition Saturn, or Saturn opposition Sun, or Saturn opposition Moon. So Saturn goes around and it makes contact with each of the planets bit by bit as it goes around. Now Saturn I've started with because it's the one thing that's really obvious. Usually there's an event. Saturn's very much to do with physical grounding and giving form to things, structuring things. So very often you see an event taking place when you're going through a Saturn transit, especially if Saturn's crossing one of the 4 angles. You'll notice that. That'll be something to record in your life, and you'll look back on that time very likely as a time of big change. The other transits aren't necessarily enacted by physical events. Jupiter transits are much faster. Jupiter takes 12 years to go around the circle, so it's about a year in each house or each sign. And a Jupiter transit tends to the Jupiter return, at least, tends to mark the next stage, the next big chapter in your life unfolding, a 12-year cycle unfolding. And if Jupiter is in transit to your Sun, that would be the same as well. With the other planets, it would just make you feel good in that area. So if Jupiter conjuncts your Mercury, you can talk quite well, and you might write your book then, or you might do public speaking then or something. So Jupiter, really, people tend to like Jupiter transits. Not so much Pisces. Pisces people don't seem to like Jupiter transits quite as much, because Jupiter is all going to take boundaries away. It's going to enable you to expand. And Pisces is already unbounded. So it doesn't really want to go any further, and it likes the rocky shores to wash up against. Its oceanic qualities need shorelines to make it feel defined and safe. So apart from Pisces, though, most of us like a Jupiter transit. Uranus transits are fast and furious sometimes. It can be shocking. It can be very enlightening. But Uranus comes with an electrical energy that's supercharged. And in all of these outer planets, when they're in transit, in their different ways, they break apart what is dead and no longer useful in terms of your personal evolution. So Uranus does that with a lightning flash, and it just gives you the insight for a split second to see your life differently, which passes pretty much immediately, except that you retain a bit of an afterglow of consciousness. You can see things, everything for a moment, and then just remember some of it. And if you then change your life quickly, very quickly indeed, having this consciousness of what you've been doing wrong, then that's great. That's the thing to do. If you don't, then there's a very good chance that you're going to have a shocking occurrence, by which reluctantly you have to surrender what is dead. It's not going to be comfortable. So these outer planets aren't always comfortable at all. They're ruthless. They don't care about personal feelings. But Uranus ones can be very exciting, and they can give you opportunities and a huge dose of energy, which makes you think, and you can do anything. You can do anything you want for a short period of time with this Uranus transit. Neptune transits are quite different. They're almost impossible to identify, because Neptune is like the mist coming in. You don't really know that it's coming in until you notice that it's misty, and it's perhaps your hair's wet and so on, and you never knew when it happened. Neptune kind of creeps up on you, and its functionality is one of disillusion. It dissolves things. So in getting rid of what must pass out of your life, whereas Uranus says, that's it has to go now or else, really obviously Neptune just softly disintegrates that which is not working in your life. And it robs you of things that you don't need anymore. But you might not know that you don't need them, so it feels like a sense of loss very often. That's the first hit of the transit. The transits that we're talking about, typically but not always, they hit once forward and then they go back and hit a second time going retrograde, and they hit a third time this time going forward. The exceptions are Jupiter sometimes just has one hit, and some planets, the slow planets, can have 5 hits. Forward, back, forward, back, forward. But typically, forward, back, forward. Now, the forward hit of Neptune is not a hit at all. It's just like a waftiness, like something's happening and I don't know what it is, and then it just goes away and goes retrograde, and you know something's going on, and it doesn't feel right. But the third hit comes along, and you notice that you've lost things that you didn't know that you wanted to lose. Things like your reputation and your health and your job and your relationship, and you can lose all of these things at the same time. Especially if it is in Neptune squaring your moon or something, or it can be quite very, very difficult actually. However, all of these out-of-planet transits come with a gift, and the gift is well worth the price. This is what you have to remember. This is what gets you through them. What you're going to get after the transit has passed is well worth the cost. Excuse me. So in Neptune, you become much more aware of your spiritual station in life. You move up a level to a higher spiritual level, and you start taking on behaviors, jobs, activities which represent a spiritual dimension in your life, typically. Pluto transits are also somewhat hidden and secret. For a while, they creep up on you and then they announce themselves. And it might take the form of the threat of death. Even in your 30s or something, a Pluto transit, a lot of people now in their mid-30s are going through a Pluto square Pluto. And that can announce itself as like, if you don't mend your ways, I'm going to kill you, says Pluto. You know, like the doctor might say, oh, you know, what's that lump? What's that growth? And you might think, oh my God, is it cancer? You know, or something like that. Pluto delivers these kind of hard-hitting questions. And sometimes it's not, but you've been shaken, awakened to the understanding that you're not immortal. And if you've been trying to claim too much power, more power than you have, then Pluto will come across your path, and it will present to you an image of what real power looks like. You know, the authority of the police, or a gangster with a gun, or something like that. Something you know you really don't want to deal with. So Pluto's presenting to you the darker side of your misdemeanors, and wagging its finger in, well, actually not wagging its finger, that's more like what Saturn does, is pointing a gun at you, Pluto, and saying, you know, you got to deal with this. And it, you know, let's say, for example, you've decided to leave your lover, and you just have one last night in bed. There's a very good chance if you do that during a Pluto transit, you'll have a baby out of that at the worst possible time. That's the kind of thing that Pluto does. It's not good-humoured in its operation at all. I haven't mentioned Chiron. Not everybody understands Chiron or knows about Chiron, but Chiron is also a very great influence, I think. And in transits, it will present to you a clear sense of what is your hurt, what is your pain, your wound. And if you go into it and you allow yourself to admit that you are hurt, you're wounded, then Chiron will offer you an explanation about that, and it will enable you to change your perception. And when you do change your perception, then it's healed, and you become something of a healer yourself and a teacher. You can explain this to other people. That's what Chiron transits do. Transits are fun. It's when you go through evolutionary shifts in your life. If you want that. If you don't want it, they're not fun at all, typically.